The flames devoured everything she had ever known, and by the time the sun rose over the Idaho hills that morning in August of 1883, there was nothing left of the small ranch house but smoking timber and ash scattered across the dirt. Josephine Nash stood barefoot in her nightdress, watching the embers glow in the pre-dawn darkness, her face streaked with soot and tears she refused to acknowledge. She had awakened to the smell of smoke and the sound of hoofbeats thundering away into the night, had barely made it out with her life before the roof collapsed in a shower of sparks. Everything else was gone. The photographs of her parents, dead these 3 years, the quilts her mother had stitched, the few pieces of jewelry passed down through generations. The deed to the land, though she supposed the land itself remained, worthless as it felt now without shelter or supplies. Her nearest neighbor was 5 miles away, and she knew she should start walking, but her legs would not move. The horror of it held her frozen, the violation of knowing that someone had done this deliberately, had struck a match and condemned her home to destruction while she slept inside. She was 22 years old and suddenly owned nothing but the thin cotton gown on her back and the land beneath her feet. The sun climbed higher, revealing the full extent of the devastation. The barn had burned too, though mercifully her 2 horses had broken free and now stood at a distance, wild-eyed and trembling. The chicken coop was destroyed, the hens scattered or dead. The small vegetable garden she had tended so carefully was trampled, boot prints clear in the soft earth. It was those boot prints that saved her from complete despair. At least 6 men, maybe more. They had not been careful. They had not expected anyone to survive to track them, she realized with a cold chill. They had intended for her to die in that fire. She was still standing there when she heard the sound of a horse approaching at a steady trot. Her body tensed, fear flooding through her, but when the rider came into view, she recognized him as Lucas Carmichael, a cowboy who worked cattle on the large ranch that bordered her property to the north. She had seen him occasionally over the past year, always at a distance, a tall figure on horseback moving herds across the open range. They had never spoken more than a brief greeting when their paths crossed in Wallace on supply runs. He reined in his horse, a sturdy bay gelding, and dismounted with the easy grace of a man who had spent most of his life in the saddle. He was perhaps 26 or 27, lean and weathered by sun and wind, with dark hair that needed cutting and blue eyes that seemed to take in everything at once. Those eyes moved from the smoking ruins to Josephine, and something hardened in his expression. "Miss Nash," he said quietly, removing his hat. "I saw the smoke from the ridge. Are you hurt?" She shook her head, not trusting her voice. Now that someone else was here, the shock was beginning to lift, and she felt dangerously close to breaking down entirely. Lucas looked back at the ruins, his jaw tight. How many were there? The question surprised her. "You believe me that it was not an accident? No accident burns that complete or tramples a garden like that." He gestured to the boot prints. "How many? I do not know. I heard them riding away." 6, maybe more. Her voice came out hoarse from the smoke she had breathed. "I did not see their faces." Lucas was quiet for a moment, studying the ground with an intensity that made her think he saw more than she did. Finally, he looked up at her again. "You should not be standing here in the open. If they meant to kill you, they might come back to finish the job when they realize you survived." The words sent ice through her veins. She had not thought of that. "Can you ride?" he asked. "Yes." "Good, wait here." He moved toward her horses, speaking in a low, calm voice that gradually settled the frightened animals enough for him to approach. He fashioned a makeshift bridle from rope he carried on his saddle and led the mare back to Josephine. "Go to Wallace. Go to the sheriff. Tell him what happened. Stay at the hotel until this is sorted out. I have no money for a hotel. Lucas reached into his pocket and pulled out a small leather pouch. He pressed it into her hand. Take this. It is not much, but it will keep you fed and sheltered for a while. Josephine stared at the pouch, then at him. Why would you do this? You do not even know me. Something flickered across his face, an emotion she could not quite identify. Because someone should have been here to help you, and no one was. Because this is wrong, and I have seen too much wrong go unanswered in this territory. He held her gaze steadily. Go to Wallace, Miss Nash. I will see what I can learn about who did this. You are going to track them. I am going to try. He helped her onto the mare's bare back, his hands steady and impersonal. Tell the sheriff everything you remember. Every detail, no matter how small. She gathered the rope reins, looking down at him. In the growing daylight, she could see that his face was kind despite its hard edges, that there was something genuine in his concern. Thank you, she managed. I will repay you. Just stay safe. He stepped back, already turning his attention to the ground, to the tracks the gang had left behind. Josephine rode toward Wallace with the sun climbing behind her, leaving Lucas Carmichael standing in the ruins of her life like some avenging angel she had not known she needed. Wallace was a rough mining town that had grown prosperous from the silver strikes in the nearby mountains, though the boom was beginning to fade by 1883. The main street was lined with false-fronted buildings, a mix of respectable establishments and rougher places where miners spent their wages on whiskey and cards. Josephine created quite a stir riding through town in her nightdress, and by the time she reached the sheriff's office, several townspeople had gathered to stare. Sheriff Tom Barrett was a gruff man in his 50s who listened to her story with a deepening frown. He made notes in a leather-bound journal, asked questions about the timing and the sounds she had heard. But when she finished, he leaned back in his chair and shook his head. Could have been anyone, Miss Nash. Drifters, maybe. Men like that are long gone by now. There are tracks, Josephine insisted. Clear tracks. Mr. Carmichael is examining them now. The sheriff's expression shifted slightly. Lucas Carmichael, yes, he came by this morning after seeing the smoke. Well, the sheriff tapped his pencil against the desk. If anyone can track them, it is Lucas. Man can read sign like an Apache, but tracking and catching are two different things, especially if this gang has any sense. They will split up, cover their trail. So you are not going to do anything. Josephine felt anger cutting through her shock. I did not say that. I will ask around, see if anyone saw a group of riders leaving town late last night or early this morning. But Miss Nash, I am going to be honest with you. Unless we catch them red-handed or someone talks, the chances of bringing them to justice are slim. He stood up, his expression softening slightly. I am sorry about your home. That is a terrible thing. But you are alive, and that is what matters. You have kin anywhere. No, my parents are both dead. I have an aunt in Missouri, but we have not spoken in years. Well, you need somewhere to stay. Mrs. Henderson runs a boarding house on 3rd Street. Tell her I sent you, and she will give you a fair rate. Josephine thanked him numbly and left the office. She used some of Lucas's money to buy a simple dress and shoes from the general store, changing in a back room while the shopkeeper's wife clucked sympathetically. Then she made her way to the boarding house, where Mrs. Henderson, a plump woman with shrewd eyes and a kind heart, showed her to a small, clean room on the 2nd floor. You can stay here as long as you need, dear, Mrs. Henderson said. We will work something out about payment once you are back on your feet. Josephine sat on the narrow bed after Mrs. Henderson left, staring at the whitewashed wall. She should feel grateful. She should feel relieved to be alive and safe. Instead, she felt hollow, carved out by loss and violation. Those men, whoever they were, had not just destroyed her home. They had destroyed her sense of safety, her belief that if she worked hard and kept to herself, she would be left alone. She wondered if Lucas Carmichael had found anything. She wondered why a stranger would care enough to track the men who had done this to her. Lucas did not return to the ranch that day or the next. His boss, a Scotsman named Robert Mackenzie, who owned one of the largest cattle operations in northern Idaho, was used to Lucas's occasional absences. Lucas was a good worker, reliable and skilled, but there was something restless in him, something that drove him out onto the range for days at a time. Mackenzie had learned not to ask too many questions. What Mackenzie did not know was that Lucas had spent 2 years as a scout for the Army before drifting into ranch work, that he had learned tracking from Nez Perce guides, and could read the story written in bent grass and disturbed stones as easily as most men read a newspaper. He had left the Army because he had grown tired of chasing people who were only trying to keep their freedom, tired of the brutality and the lies. But tracking was in his blood now, and the trail left by the gang that had burned Josephine Nash's home was clear as day to his trained eyes. 6 riders heading northeast into the mountains. They had made no effort to hide their passage at first, confident in the night's concealment. But as the sun rose, they had grown more cautious, choosing rocky ground where possible, splitting up briefly then reuniting. Lucas followed patiently, reading the signs that others would have missed. A broken branch here, a displaced rock there, the distinctive chip in one horse's shoe that left a mark on softer ground. By the afternoon of the first day, he had a good sense of where they were headed. There was an old mining camp deeper in the mountains, mostly abandoned now, but still home to a few hardy souls and more than a few men hiding from the law. It was the kind of place where questions were not asked, and strangers were welcomed as long as they had coin for whiskey. Lucas made camp that night in a grove of pine trees, his fire small and nearly smokeless. He chewed on jerky and hardtack, thinking about the woman he had left standing in the ruins of her home. He had seen her before, of course, on his rides past her property. Had noticed the way she worked her small ranch alone, the determination in her straight back and steady movements. Had admired her from a distance without ever acting on it, knowing that a drifting cowboy had no business approaching a respectable woman trying to build a life for herself. Now that life was ashes, and Lucas felt the familiar anger rising in him, the same anger that had made him leave the Army. Someone had decided that Josephine Nash's life was worth less than whatever satisfaction they got from destruction. Someone had decided they could terrorize and murder without consequence. Lucas intended to prove them wrong. He reached the mining camp late in the afternoon of the second day, approaching cautiously. The camp consisted of maybe a dozen ramshackle buildings scattered along a creek bed that had once run thick with silver-bearing ore. Now the creek was mostly played out, the buildings housing men who panned for whatever traces remained, or who simply wanted to be far from civilization and its laws. Lucas rode in slowly, his hands visible and empty of weapons, though his rifle was in its saddle scabbard and his revolver was on his hip. Several men watched him from doorways and porches, their eyes hard and measuring. He stopped at what passed for a saloon, little more than a large tent with a plank bar and barrels of whiskey. The man serving looked like an ex-prospector gone to seed, his beard long and stained with tobacco. "Whiskey," Lucas said, placing a coin on the bar. The barkeep poured a generous shot into a dirty glass. Lucas drank it, feeling the burn all the way down. He had never been much of a drinker, but he needed to look like he belonged here. "Looking for some friends of mine," he said casually. 6 men riding together. "Might have come through here yesterday or the day before." The barkeep's eyes were flat. "Do not know anything about that. They might have been in a hurry, Might have been celebrating something. Mister, I do not ask questions about my customers, and they do not ask about me. That is how we all stay healthy. But something flickered in the barkeep's expression, a quick glance toward the back of the tent. Lucas caught it. He nodded slowly, poured himself another drink from the bottle the barkeep had left on the bar. Fair enough. Mind if I look around town? Might be I will run into them by chance. Free country, the barkeep said, but there was a warning in his tone. Lucas took his time finishing the drink, then walked back out into the fading daylight. He moved through the camp slowly, leading his horse, appearing aimless but actually taking note of everything. The horses tied up at various buildings, the men watching him with varying degrees of suspicion or indifference, the general layout of the place and possible routes of escape. He found what he was looking for behind a collapsed bunkhouse. 6 horses tied to a makeshift corral, still sweating and dusty from hard riding. One of them had the chipped shoe he had been tracking. Lucas did not react visibly. He simply continued his circuit of the camp, then rode out as evening fell, heading back the way he had come. But instead of riding far, he circled around and found a vantage point on a rocky outcrop above the camp, where he could watch without being seen. He settled in to wait, knowing that patience was as important as any weapon in his arsenal. In Wallace, Josephine was trying to figure out what came next. The sheriff had learned nothing useful. No one had seen a group of riders leaving town that night. No one was talking, if indeed there was anything to talk about. She had visited the land office to confirm that the deed to her property was still valid even though the physical document had burned. The clerk had been sympathetic and had filed the necessary paperwork, but that did not solve her immediate problems. She needed to rebuild, but that required money she did not have. She needed supplies, tools, lumber. She needed help, and she had no one to ask. Her pride rebelled against charity, and besides, the people of Wallace were friendly enough but not inclined to give handouts to every person struck by misfortune. On the 3rd day after the fire, she went to the bank to inquire about a loan. The banker, a thin man with spectacles and a perpetually worried expression, heard her out politely, then shook his head. "Miss Nash, I sympathize with your situation. Truly I do. But the bank cannot extend credit to an unmarried woman with no collateral and no immediate means of repayment. If you had family to co-sign, or if you were married to a man of steady employment, that would be different. But as things stand, I am afraid I cannot help you." Josephine left the bank feeling the full weight of her situation pressing down on her. In this time and place, a woman alone had few options. She could seek work as a laundress or seamstress, perhaps save enough over years to rebuild. She could give up and sell the land, take what little it would bring and try to start over somewhere else. Or she could marry, which would immediately solve most of her practical problems while creating a host of new ones if she married the wrong man. None of these options appealed to her. She returned to the boarding house and sat at the small desk in her room, trying to calculate what she would need, how long it would take to save enough. The numbers were discouraging no matter how she figured them. Mrs. Henderson knocked on her door that evening with a tray of food. "You need to eat, dear. You are wasting away." Josephine accepted the tray with gratitude she could not quite voice. As Mrs. Henderson turned to leave, Josephine found herself asking, "Do you know Lucas Carmichael well?" The older woman paused, a smile touching her lips. "Lucas? Well enough, I suppose. He stays here sometimes when he is in town. Quiet man, keeps to himself but decent through and through. Always pays his bill on time, always polite. Why do you ask? He helped me the morning of the fire, gave me money, told me to come to town. I want to repay him." "That sounds like Lucas." Mrs. Henderson settled herself on the edge of the bed, clearly prepared for a longer conversation. He has a good heart, that one. Drifted into Wallace about 2 years ago, took work with Mackenzie's ranch. Does not talk much about where he came from, but there are rumors he was an Army scout. Some say he left because he disagreed with how the tribes were being treated. Josephine absorbed this information, building a fuller picture of the man who had stood in the ruins of her home and promised to track the men responsible. "Is he married?" Mrs. Henderson laughed. "Lucas? No, dear. I do not think that man even looks at women, though plenty have tried to catch his eye. He is married to the open range, or maybe to whatever he is running from. Men like that, they do not settle easy." After Mrs. Henderson left, Josephine ate her dinner slowly, thinking about Lucas Carmichael riding alone through the mountains, tracking dangerous men for no reason except that it was the right thing to do. She found herself hoping he would be careful, hoping he would come back safe. The intensity of her hope surprised her. She barely knew him, but he had been there when she needed someone, had taken action when everyone else offered only sympathy and excuses. That meant something. Lucas watched the mining camp for 2 days, learning the rhythms of the place, identifying which of the ramshackle buildings housed the men he was looking for. They were not being particularly cautious, which told him they did not expect any pursuit. They spent their days drinking and gambling, their nights passed out in a building that listed dramatically to one side. On the 3rd night, Lucas made his move. He waited until the camp was quiet, until the last lights had gone out and the sounds of snoring replaced the sounds of voices. Then he moved down from his vantage point, as silent as smoke, and approached the horses in the makeshift corral. He spoke to them softly, calming them, then systematically cut their tack to pieces. Bridles, saddles, everything they would need to ride in pursuit. He left the horses themselves unharmed, just freed them to wander off into the darkness. Then he positioned himself near the building where the 6 men slept and fired 3 shots into the air. The response was immediate. Shouts of alarm, men stumbling out of buildings in various states of undress, guns drawn. Lucas was already moving, circling around to a pre-planned position behind a stack of old mining timbers where he had good cover and a clear view of the listing building. The 6 men emerged, cursing and shouting. One of them was tall and rangy with a scar across his cheek. Another was short and broad, built like a bull. The others were variations of hard men with violent pasts written on their faces. "Who is shooting?" the tall one yelled. "Who is out there?" Lucas waited until they were all outside, clustered together in confusion. Then he called out, his voice carrying clearly in the night air. "The woman whose house you burned is alive. She is under protection now. If any of you ever come near Wallace again, if any of you ever threaten her again, you will answer to me." There was a moment of stunned silence. Then the bull-shaped man laughed. One man is making threats. 6 against 1 is better odds than you gave her," Lucas replied. "She was sleeping when you set that fire. She could not fight back. So yes, 1 man is making threats, and you can decide whether you want to test how good I am at making them real." The tall man with the scar was not laughing. His eyes scanned the darkness, trying to locate Lucas's position. "Who the hell are you?" "Someone who knows your faces now, someone who knows your names." This was a bluff. Lucas did not know their names yet, though he would learn them eventually. "Someone who can track you anywhere you run, and who will be happy to share what he knows with the law in 3 territories." "Kill him," the scarred man said flatly. "Spread out and kill him." They started to move, but then Lucas fired again, and the bullet kicked up dirt inches from the scarred man's feet. "Your horses are gone. Your tack is cut to ribbons. You are on foot in the middle of the mountains with winter coming on. You can spend what is left of the night trying to find and kill me, which will end badly for some or all of you, or you can start walking before I change my mind about letting you live." It was the uncertainty that saved them all, Lucas knew. The men could not see him, could not gauge how well armed or well positioned he was. They could not know if he was bluffing about the horses. And there was something in his voice, a cold certainty, that suggested he had done this kind of thing before. The scarred man spat into the dirt. "This is not over. It is over the moment you leave this territory and never come back," Lucas corrected. "That is the deal. Take it or take your chances." There was more cursing, more angry muttering, but eventually the 6 men began gathering what supplies they could carry. The other inhabitants of the mining camp watched from their doorways but made no move to help or hinder. This was not their fight. Lucas waited until the men had started walking northwest, heading deeper into the mountains toward Montana. He knew they would probably double back eventually, but not before they had spent days on foot, hungry and humiliated. And he had planted the seed of fear in them, the knowledge that someone was watching, someone could find them again. It was not the justice Josephine deserved, not really. They should have been arrested, tried, jailed. But in this time and place, justice was often rough and imperfect. Lucas had done what he could with the resources he had. He waited another hour, then slipped away from the mining camp and headed back toward Wallace, riding through the night, suddenly eager to see Josephine Nash again, and tell her that the men who had destroyed her home would not be coming back. He reached Wallace on the 4th day since the fire, dusty and tired but satisfied with what he had accomplished. He went first to the sheriff's office to report what he had found. Sheriff Barrett listened to the story, his expression unreadable. When Lucas finished, the sheriff leaned back in his chair. "You ran off 6 armed men without killing any of them. They did not know I was not prepared to kill them. Fear is a powerful weapon. Could have gotten yourself killed." "Could have," Lucas agreed, "but I did not." The sheriff shook his head. "You are either very brave or very foolish, Carmichael. I have not decided which. But I suppose you did more than I could have done, so I will not complain. Just keep your head down for a while. If those men come back looking for revenge, I do not want to be scraping your body off the street. They will not come back." Lucas said it with certainty. "Not anytime soon, anyway. They were drifters, outlaws. Men like that move on when the cost gets too high. Let us hope you are right." The sheriff made some notes in his journal. "Does Miss Nash know you went after them?" "Not yet. I thought I should report to you first. She is staying at Mrs. Henderson's place. I expect she will want to thank you." Lucas left the sheriff's office and walked to the boarding house, feeling strangely nervous. He had faced down 6 dangerous men without a tremor, but the thought of seeing Josephine again made his heart beat faster. Mrs. Henderson answered his knock with a knowing smile. "Lucas Carmichael. I wondered when you would turn up. Come in, come in. Miss Nash is in the sitting room." Josephine was standing by the window when Lucas entered, the afternoon light catching in her dark hair. She turned at the sound of his footsteps, and her face transformed with relief in something else, something warmer. "Mr. Carmichael," she said, crossing the room quickly. "You came back. Are you all right?" "I am fine." He suddenly felt awkward, aware of his trail-stained clothes and several days' worth of beard. "I found them. The men who burned your house. They will not be bothering you again." Josephine's eyes widened. "You found them. What happened? Did the sheriff arrest them?" Lucas explained, watching her face as he spoke. She listened intently, her expression shifting from shock to something like awe. "You risked your life for me," she said when he finished. "For someone you barely know. It was the right thing to do. Most men would not have bothered." She looked down at her hands, then back up at him. "Thank you. I do not know how to repay you for what you have done. You do not owe me anything, Miss Nash. Yes, I do. I owe you my life, probably, if they had come back looking for me. She trailed off, then seemed to gather herself. Please, sit down. You must be exhausted. They sat in the boarding-house parlor while Mrs. Henderson brought coffee and sandwiches. Lucas ate gratefully, realizing he had not had a proper meal in days. Josephine sat across from him, asking questions about the tracking, the camp, the confrontation. She was intelligent and curious, and Lucas found himself talking more than he usually did, drawn out by her genuine interest. "What will you do now?" he asked eventually. "About your property," Josephine's expression clouded. "I do not know. I need to rebuild, but I have no money for materials or labor. The bank will not give me a loan. I suppose I will have to work and save, but that will take years." She squared her shoulders. "But I will manage. I have my land and I have my life. That is more than I had a few days ago." Lucas admired her determination, even as he recognized the impossibility of her situation. A woman alone, with no resources, trying to rebuild a ranch. The odds were against her. "If you need help with the physical work when you are ready to rebuild, I can lend a hand. I am good with carpentry and stonework." Josephine looked startled. "You have already done so much." "I work for Mackenzie, but I have some free time. A house is not that hard to build if you have strong backs and willing hands." He hesitated, then added, "And I know others who would help." "Ranch hands like projects, breaks up the monotony." "I could not ask that of you." "You are not asking, I am offering." He met her eyes steadily. "You have been dealt a bad hand, Miss Nash. People should help each other out when that happens. That is what communities are supposed to do." Tears suddenly welled in Josephine's eyes, and she blinked them back fiercely. "Forgive me. I have been trying so hard to be strong, and your kindness is making it difficult." Lucas felt something twist in his chest. "You do not have to be strong all the time." "Yes, I do." But her voice broke on the words, and then she was crying, the tears she had been holding back for days finally breaking through. "I am sorry. This is not appropriate." Lucas did what instinct told him to do. He moved to sit beside her and placed a careful hand on her shoulder. "It is perfectly appropriate. You nearly died. You lost everything. You are allowed to cry." Josephine leaned into him just slightly, and Lucas felt the contact like a brand through his shirt. He had not been this close to a woman since before he joined the army, had not allowed himself to want that kind of closeness. But Josephine Nash fit against his side like she belonged there, and suddenly, Lucas understood that he was in trouble. Not the kind that came from outlaws and burning buildings, but the deeper, more dangerous kind that came from caring about another person more than was wise. They sat that way for several minutes, until Josephine's tears subsided and she pulled back, wiping her eyes with the back of her hand. "I apologize. You must think me a complete fool." "I think you are one of the strongest people I have ever met," Lucas said honestly, "and I think you have every right to break down sometimes." Josephine looked at him, really looked at him, and Lucas felt the weight of that gaze. "Why are you doing this?" she asked softly. "The truth, please." Lucas considered lying or deflecting or giving some noble speech about justice and righteousness, but those dark eyes deserved honesty. "Because when I saw what had happened to you, I was angry in a way I have not been angry in a long time. Because I have seen too much wrong in this world and I am tired of walking past it. And because—" He paused, then forged ahead. "Because I have noticed you before when I rode past your property. I admired how hard you worked, how determined you were. I wished I had the courage to stop and introduce myself properly. When I saw your house burning, I felt like I had failed you somehow, even though we had never spoken." Josephine was silent for a long moment. Then she said, "I noticed you too. I used to watch for you on the days when I knew the cattle would be moving past my land. I would tell myself I was just taking a break from work, but really I was hoping for a glimpse of you." The confession hung in the air between them, fragile and precious. Lucas felt his heart hammering. "Miss Nash." "Josephine," she interrupted. "After all this, you should call me Josephine. Josephine." He liked the sound of her name, the way it felt in his mouth. "I am not much of a catch. I am a drifter with no prospects beyond ranch work. I have no property, no savings to speak of. But if you would allow me to court you properly, I would very much like to do so." Josephine smiled, and it transformed her face, made her beautiful in a way that had nothing to do with features and everything to do with genuine joy. "Lucas Carmichael, you tracked 6 dangerous men through the mountains to defend my honor and are offering to build me a house with your own hands. I think you are selling yourself short on the prospects front. Is that a yes?" "That is a yes." They sat together in Mrs. Henderson's parlor while the afternoon faded into evening, talking about everything and nothing. Lucas learned that Josephine's parents had died in a typhoid outbreak 3 years earlier, that she had kept the ranch going alone out of sheer stubbornness, and a refusal to let their legacy die. Josephine learned that Lucas had grown up in Wyoming, the youngest of 5 children, that he had joined the army at 18 seeking adventure and left at 24 seeking peace. "You ever think about settling down permanently?" Josephine asked. "Or does the wandering suit you?" Lucas considered the question. "I used to think I was not built for settling, but lately I have been wondering if maybe I just had not found the right reason to stay in one place." He looked at her. "Does that make sense?" "Perfect sense." Josephine's hand found his, their fingers lacing together naturally. "I think we all wander until we find where we belong." Over the following weeks, Wallace saw the beginning of something that would be talked about for years afterward. Lucas spoke to his boss, Robert Mackenzie, about the situation, and Mackenzie surprised him by offering to donate lumber from his own land for the rebuilding effort. "That girl has grit," Mackenzie said in his thick Scottish accent. "Anyone who can work a ranch alone for 3 years deserves a break. And besides, you have been the best hand I have ever had. If this is what you want, I will help make it happen." Word spread through the ranching community, and soon volunteers began appearing at what was left of Josephine's property. Ranch hands with construction skills. A stonemason who built a new fireplace and chimney. Women from town who brought food and helped clear away the debris. The barn went up first, then the house itself, built larger and sturdier than the original. Lucas was there every day, directing the work, his hands blistered from hammer and saw. Josephine worked alongside him, learning skills she had never needed before, her respect for him growing with each passing day. They took their meals together sitting on lumber piles, talking and laughing, the connection between them strengthening like the frame of the house they were building. One evening, as the sun set in a blaze of orange and gold, they stood together looking at the nearly completed structure. The walls were up, the roof was on, the windows were installed. It was not fancy, but it was solid and well built, a home that could withstand whatever the Idaho weather threw at it. "I cannot believe this is real," Josephine said softly. "A month ago I had nothing. Now I have a house and friends and—" She looked at Lucas. "And you?" Lucas turned to face her fully, his heart in his throat. "Josephine, I know we have not been courting for long. I know this is probably too soon, but I have never been more certain of anything in my life." He took both her hands in his. "I love you. I think I started loving you the moment I saw you standing in those ruins, refusing to break. I want to spend my life with you if you will have me. I want to help you run this ranch to build a future here together. Will you marry me?" Josephine's eyes filled with tears, but she was smiling. "Yes." Yes, Lucas, I will marry you. I love you too. I think I have loved you since you gave me your money and told me to go to Wallace, since you rode off to track those men when no one else would. Yes, I will marry you. Lucas kissed her then, deeply and thoroughly, pouring all his feelings into the contact. Josephine kissed him back with equal passion, her arms wrapping around his neck, and for a long moment the rest of the world ceased to exist. They were married 6 weeks later in the small church in Wallace, with half the town in attendance. Josephine wore a simple white dress that Mrs. Henderson and the other ladies had helped her sew. Lucas wore his only suit, brushed clean and pressed. Robert Mackenzie served as best man, and Mrs. Henderson stood with Josephine as matron of honor. The ceremony was brief but heartfelt, and when the minister pronounced them husband and wife, the church erupted in applause. The reception was held in the town square, with tables laden with food and a fiddle player providing music. Lucas and Josephine danced their first dance as husband and wife under the stars, surrounded by the community that had helped them build their new life. "Are you happy?" Lucas murmured into her ear as they swayed to the music. "Happier than I ever imagined I could be," Josephine replied. "Are you?" "More than I have words for." They moved into the new house the next day, and Lucas officially left Mackenzie's employ to work the ranch full-time with Josephine. It was hard work, harder than Lucas had anticipated, but deeply satisfying. They bought cattle with the little money they had pooled together, started rebuilding the herd that had been scattered in the fire. They planted a new garden, repaired fences, broke horses to sell in Wallace. The days were long and exhausting, but the nights were theirs alone. They learned each other's rhythms, each other's needs and desires. Lucas discovered that Josephine was funny in quiet, unexpected ways, that she sang while she worked, that she was fiercer than she looked when defending her animals or her land. Josephine discovered that Lucas was tender despite his hard exterior, that he had nightmares sometimes about his army days, that he loved reading in the evenings when the work was done, and would read aloud to her for hours. Winter came early that year, 1883 sliding into 1884 with heavy snows that blanketed the Idaho hills. Lucas and Josephine spent long evenings by the new fireplace, planning for spring, dreaming about the future. On Christmas Eve, Josephine told Lucas she was pregnant. He was stunned silent for a moment, then swept her up in his arms with a whoop of joy. "A baby! We are going to have a baby, in late summer, I think." Josephine laughed, holding on to him. "Are you happy?" Happy does not begin to cover it. He set her down carefully as if she might break, his hand moving to her still flat stomach. "A son or daughter, our child. Are you hoping for one or the other? I do not care." Lucas kissed her forehead, her cheeks, her lips. "Healthy, that is all I hope for, healthy and with your courage." "And your kindness," Josephine added. The pregnancy progressed smoothly through the winter and into spring. Josephine continued working the ranch until her bulk made it impractical, and then she turned her attention to preparing for the baby. She sewed tiny clothes, washed and rewashed the cradle that Lucas had built with his own hands. Mrs. Henderson and the other women from Wallace visited regularly, bringing gifts and advice. In early September of 1884, on a warm evening when the crickets sang in the grass, Josephine went into labor. Lucas rode for the doctor, his heart in his throat, terrified in a way he had never been facing down armed men. The doctor arrived with reassuring calm and took over the bedroom, shooing Lucas out to pace anxiously in the main room. The labor lasted through the night and into the next morning. Every cry of pain from the bedroom drove spikes of fear through Lucas's chest. He prayed to a God he was not sure he believed in, making desperate bargains and promises. Finally, as the sun climbed high, he heard a new sound. The thin, furious wail of a newborn. The doctor emerged minutes later, his sleeves rolled up and a smile on his weathered face. "You have a son, Mr. Carmichael, a big, healthy boy, and your wife is doing fine. Tired, but fine." Lucas nearly collapsed with relief. "Can I see them?" "Give us a few minutes to get cleaned up, then yes." Those few minutes felt like hours. Finally, the doctor called him in. Josephine was propped up in bed, pale and exhausted but radiant, holding a bundle of blankets. Lucas approached slowly, reverently, and looked down at his son for the first time. The baby had a shock of dark hair and a red, wrinkled face. His eyes were squeezed shut, his tiny fists waving. He was the most beautiful thing Lucas had ever seen. "Meet Samuel," Josephine said softly. "Samuel Thomas Carmichael." "Samuel." Lucas reached out a tentative finger and the baby's hand closed around it with surprising strength. Something in Lucas's chest cracked open, a reservoir of love he had not known he possessed flooding through him. "Hello, Samuel. I am your father. I am going to take such good care of you, I promise." Josephine smiled up at him, tears of joy and exhaustion streaming down her face. "We did it. We made a whole person. You did it." Lucas leaned down to kiss her forehead. "You are amazing, so strong. I am in awe of you." "Stay with us," Josephine murmured, her eyes already drifting closed. "Both of you. Always," Lucas promised. He settled into the chair beside the bed, his son cradled in one arm, his free hand holding Josephine's. Always. The years that followed were full of the kind of happiness that comes not from grand gestures but from daily life shared with someone you love. Samuel grew into a sturdy, curious boy who followed his father everywhere, learning the ranch from the time he could walk. In 1886, Josephine gave birth to a daughter they named Clara, a bright-eyed girl who had her mother's determination and her father's kindness. The ranch prospered. Lucas proved to have a gift for horse breeding, and the Carmichael horses became sought after throughout northern Idaho and into Montana. Josephine managed the cattle operation, expanding their herd steadily. They hired hands during the busy seasons, treated them fairly, and earned a reputation as good employers. Lucas never forgot the violence that had brought him and Josephine together, but he chose not to dwell on it. The men who had burned the house never returned to Wallace, as far as anyone knew. Occasionally, Lucas would hear rumors of a gang matching their description causing trouble in Montana or Wyoming, but he never pursued it. He had found his justice in building something better, in protecting and nurturing the woman he loved and the family they had created together. On their 5th anniversary, Lucas and Josephine stood together on the porch of their home, watching the sunset paint the Idaho hills in shades of gold and crimson. Samuel and Clara were playing in the yard, their laughter carrying on the evening breeze. "You ever regret it?" Josephine asked, leaning into Lucas's side. "Giving up the wandering life for this?" Lucas put his arm around her, pulling her close. "Not for a single moment. This is what I was wandering toward all along. I just did not know it until I found you, even though it started with such horror." "Especially because of that." He turned to face her. "That fire could have destroyed you. Instead, you took the ashes and built something beautiful. You let me be part of that. You gave me a home, a family, a purpose. I am the luckiest man alive." Josephine kissed him, soft and sweet. "I think we are both lucky. We found each other when we needed each other most. And we will keep finding each other," Lucas said, "every day for the rest of our lives." Samuel called for his parents then, wanting to show them something he had found in the grass, and the moment broke into motion and laughter. But as Lucas followed his wife and children into the yard, he carried with him the profound contentment of a man who had finally found where he belonged. The years continued to pass in the rhythm of seasons and harvests. In 1889, Josephine gave birth to twin boys, Robert and William, named for Lucas's father and Josephine's father respectively. The house was loud and chaotic and full of love. Lucas built an addition to accommodate the growing family, working in the evenings by lamplight after the day's ranch work was done. Samuel proved to have inherited his father's tracking skills and his mother's head for business. By the time he was 12, he was helping manage the horse breeding program, keeping meticulous records of bloodlines and training progress. Clara was gentler but no less capable, with a gift for healing. She doctored injured animals and eventually became the person neighbors called when their livestock fell sick. The twins were wild and rambunctious, always getting into some scrape or another, but they were good-hearted boys who adored their older siblings and parents. The Carmichael Ranch became known as a place of warmth and welcome. Travelers passing through were offered meals and a place to sleep in the barn. Neighbors in need found help without having to ask. In 1892, when Samuel was 8 and Clara was 6, an Apache family fleeing persecution in Arizona arrived at the ranch, desperate and hungry. Lucas gave them food and supplies without hesitation, remembering the Nez Perce guides who had taught him to read the land. Josephine welcomed them into her home, and for 3 days the family rested and recovered before continuing north toward Canada. "You are taking a risk," one of their neighbors warned when word got around. "People do not take kindly to Indian sympathizers." "People did not take kindly to a woman ranching alone either," Josephine replied coolly. "But here I am, and here I will stay, helping whoever needs it." Lucas could not have been prouder of her in that moment. She had taken the trauma of nearly being killed and transformed it not into bitterness, but into compassion. She understood what it meant to be vulnerable, to need help, and she extended that help generously. On a spring morning in 1895, 12 years after the fire that had changed everything, Josephine and Lucas took a rare moment to ride out together across their land. The children were with Mrs. Henderson in town for the day, giving their parents a respite from the constant demands of family life. They rode to the spot where the original house had stood. Wildflowers grew there now, carpeting the ground in purple and gold. No trace remained of the destruction that had once marked this place. "You think about it much anymore?" Lucas asked, dismounting to help Josephine down. "That night?" Josephine considered the question. "Not often. When I do, it feels almost like it happened to someone else, like it was a story I heard rather than something I lived through." She looked up at him. "Does that seem strange?" "No." Lucas took her hands. "I think it means you have healed. That we have built something strong enough that the past cannot destroy it." "We have, haven't we?" Josephine smiled. "Built something strong, something lasting." They stood among the wildflowers, the spring sun warm on their faces, and Lucas marveled at the journey they had taken. From ash and fear to this moment of peace and love. From strangers who had admired each other from a distance to partners in every sense of the word. "I love you," he said, because it never got old saying it, and because he wanted her to hear it in this place where their story had truly begun. "I love you too," Josephine replied, rising on her toes to kiss him. "Thank you for tracking those men. Thank you for making them pay for what they did. Thank you for giving me my life back." "You gave me mine," Lucas said. "You gave me a reason to stop running." They held each other as the wind whispered through the grass, and the wildflowers swayed around them. Two people who had found each other in the aftermath of violence and had chosen love over fear, hope over despair. That evening they returned home to their children's joyful welcome, to the sturdy house Lucas had built and Josephine had made into a home. Samuel showed them a new foal that had been born while they were gone. Clara presented a drawing she had made of the family. The twins wrestled on the floor until Lucas separated them with gentle firmness. Later, after the children were asleep, Lucas and Josephine sat together on the porch, watching the stars emerge one by one in the darkening sky. This was their ritual now, this quiet time at the end of the day when they could simply be together without the demands of children or ranch work intruding. "What are you thinking about?" Josephine asked, her head on his shoulder. "The future," Lucas said. "What our children will make of their lives. Whether the ranch will stay in the family. Whether we will live to see grandchildren." "We will," Josephine said with certainty. "We will see our grandchildren and our great-grandchildren. We will grow old together on this land, and we will be happy every day." Lucas smiled at her confidence, even as he hoped she was right. "You sound very sure." "I am sure. We have survived everything life has thrown at us. A little thing like time is not going to defeat us now." She was right, of course. The years proved her right again and again. They did grow old together on that land. They did see their grandchildren, starting in 1905 when Samuel married a schoolteacher from Wallace and had a daughter they named Josephine after her grandmother. Clara married a doctor and had 3 sons. The twins, inseparable as always, married sisters and lived on adjoining properties they bought with money earned working the Carmichael ranch. Lucas and Josephine watched it all unfold, watched their family tree branch and grow, watched the ranch they had built continue to prosper. They weathered droughts and harsh winters, sick cattle and fallen horses, all the normal trials of life on the land. But they weathered it together, their partnership as strong in their 60s as it had been in their 20s. In 1920, on a warm evening very much like that evening in 1895, Lucas and Josephine sat on the same porch, their hair now silver, their hands gnarled from decades of work but still clasped together. 37 years, Josephine said, marvel in her voice. "We have been married 37 years. "Best 37 years of my life," Lucas replied. His voice was rougher now, worn by age, but the love in it was unchanged. "Mine too." Josephine squeezed his hand, even though it started with everything burning down. "Maybe that was necessary," Lucas mused. "Maybe we both needed to lose everything to find what really mattered. Maybe so." Josephine leaned her head on his shoulder, fitting into the space she had occupied for nearly 4 decades. "I am glad it was you who found me that morning. I am glad you were the one who cared enough to make them pay." "I would do it again," Lucas said. "I would do it 1,000 times over if it meant having this life with you." They sat in comfortable silence as night fell, surrounded by the home they had built from ashes, the family they had raised with love, the legacy they would leave behind. Around them, the ranch hummed with life. Grandchildren playing in the yard, the sounds of horses in the barn. The smell of dinner cooking, prepared by Clara who had come to visit with her family. Lucas thought back to that young man of 26 who had seen smoke on the horizon and ridden toward it without knowing what he would find. He could never have imagined then that he was riding toward his entire future, toward the woman who would complete him, toward a love that would sustain him through all the years of his life. "Thank you," he said softly. Josephine lifted her head to look at him. "For what?" "For saying yes. For taking a chance on a drifting cowboy with no prospects. For building this life with me." "Thank you for asking," Josephine replied. "For tracking those men when no one else would. For seeing me as worth defending. For loving me so well for all these years." They kissed, soft and sweet and familiar. A kiss that contained 37 years of kisses, of love declarations and quiet moments and passion that had not dimmed with age. Inside the house, their grandchildren called for them, wanting to hear stories before bed. Lucas and Josephine rose together, moving a bit more slowly than they once had, but still strong, still capable, still utterly devoted to each other. As they walked inside, Lucas thought about the story those children wanted to hear. The story of the fire and the tracking and the house that rose from ashes. It had become a family legend, told and retold, embellished slightly with each generation. But the heart of it remained true. A young woman who had lost everything. A cowboy who had made the men who hurt her pay for it. And a love that had grown from that shared trauma into something beautiful and enduring. It was, Lucas thought, the best story he knew. And the best part was that it was true, every word of it. He had lived it. He was still living it. And he would live it gladly until his last breath. Grateful every day for the fire that had brought Josephine Nash into his life and made her Josephine Carmichael. That night, after the stories were told and the grandchildren were tucked into beds scattered throughout the expanded house, Lucas and Josephine lay together in their own bed, the same bed they had shared for 37 years. The moon shone through the window, silvering Josephine's hair as she curled against Lucas's side. "I love you," she murmured, half asleep. "I love you too," Lucas replied, his arm tightening around her. "Always and forever." "Always and forever," Josephine echoed. They fell asleep that way, as they had 1,000 times before. Two souls intertwined so completely that it was impossible to say where one ended and the other began. And if you had asked either of them if they would change a single moment of their shared history, even the terrible night of the fire, they would have said no. Because that fire had forged them, had brought them together, had given them everything that mattered. The gang that burned down her house had meant to destroy Josephine Nash. Instead, they had inadvertently created the Carmichael family legacy. Lucas had tracked them for weeks and made them pay, yes, but the real payment, the real justice, was in what he and Josephine built together afterward. A love that lasted, a family that thrived, a ranch that prospered, a life so full of joy and purpose that the darkness of that August night in 1883 could never overcome it. In the end, love had won. It always did, Lucas thought as sleep claimed him. When you found the right person and held on tight, when you chose each other every day through all the trials and triumphs life brought, love always won. And that was the best kind of justice there was.